Hello, everyone, and thank you for tuning in to our session this morning, Volunteering Vacations, Regenerating the Land Through Guided Travel Trips. My name is Scott Bricker, and I'm the Interim Vice President of Destination Development at Travel Oregon, and will be moderating this session. Before we get started, a few housekeeping notes. You've probably been on this session, on this platform already, as we're into the summit, but do take a minute to orient yourself to the platform, as things look a little different than what you might be used to. We'll be using a chat box to the right of the video player to say hi to your fellow session attendees and introduce yourself. And feel free to do that while I give this introduction. We also held time at the end of this morning's session to answer questions from the audience. We're asking that if you ask questions that you use the chat box so that others can see your question and that feel others can potentially build on your question to create a dialogue, and then we'd love to be able to answer them. And then if for some reason you're not able to join us for the entire session or love what we shared so much that you'd like to come back and refer it again or share it with a colleague, we will have a recording of the session, and it'll remain on this page in the Summit website for 1 month. So we'll be able to watch that on YouTube. Travel Oregon is the state's tourism board. We are our destination management organization with a vision of a better life for all Oregonians through strong, sustainable local communities that welcome a diversity of explorers. The tourism economy is one of the top 3 traded sector industries in smaller cities and towns in Oregon. And pre-pandemic, we employed approximately 120,000 people in Oregon. Tourism is a traded sector industry because a travel trip is considered a trip of 50 miles or more away from your home or an overnight stay. So it brings money coming in from outside communities into communities that can then recirculate within those communities. Travel Oregon has found that outdoor recreation and scenic beauty are Oregon's top 2 drivers of travel and tourism, of people within Oregon traveling around the state and people coming from outside of the state domestically or internationally. So the development and stewardship of outdoor recreation is critical for the tourism, and Travel Oregon is committed to this work. For Travel Oregon, we have critical outcomes and that we measure, including economic impact, quality of visitor experience, and the sentiments of locals. These 3 goals are very hard to balance, and more we are discussing the concept of regenerative travel and looking at specific strategies within that concept to how we can meet all 3 of these goals. Volunteering vacations and activities by visitors are one way that we're diving deeper into exploring to meet all these outcomes. And for these reasons, we have started to explore and collaborate. We wanted to bring this conversation to you all in a deeper dive in this session. The learning outcomes of this session include learn more about the concept of regenerative tourism and how cultural exchange can lead to more sustainable outdoor recreation, to hear examples of how to build innovative partnerships between different industries to accomplish shared outcomes, and to learn tips and possible future opportunities to help develop volunteerism projects in your area. So I'm thrilled to be joined on this virtual stage today by an expert panel that will dive deeper into these topics. I'm just going to give names and organizations, as each panelist will have a chance to dive deeper and introduce themselves. But first, we have Jennifer Spatz from Global Family Travels, founder and CEO, and she will give us an overview of regenerative travel concepts, kind of our mini keynote for this session. And then we have a panel that developed and led a regenerative travel project in the Mackenzie River Valley, including Kieran Wild from First Nature Tours, founder of First Nature Tours, Elisa Archer from Cascade Volunteers, their executive director, and Matt Peterson of the U.S. Forest Service, Willamette National Forest, Recreation Staff Officer, although he is currently on detail in Mount Hood. Again, each of these presenters will further introduce themselves, and then we'll have a discussion and Q&A afterwards. So with that, I would like to pass the baton to Jennifer. Thank you.
Hello, everyone, and thank you so much to Travel Oregon for this opportunity to share some information about Global Family Travel's approach to regenerative adventures to support destination stewardship. I really admire all of the work that Travel Oregon does to support its beautiful destination, and I'm so thrilled to be working with all these amazing partners such as First Nature Tours and Cascade Adventures. Volunteers, sorry. And anyway, so we'll talk more about the partnership. But before we do that, I thought I'd give a little bit of a background about what Global Family Travels does. And we will, sorry, I'm getting to the slides here. Next slide. And then take a deeper dive into our partnership in Oregon and what that looked like. So a little bit about Global Family Travels. We're a we're a little bit more than a traditional tour operator. We basically partner with nonprofit organizations globally, and we use tourism to solve community challenges and environmental issues, and have 3 travel pillars of Learn-Serve-Immerse, which I'll talk about in a minute because we've used those pillars in our collaborative tour. With the complex world of travel right now that we're in, Global Family Travels also offers travel advisor services to help put together trips for custom trips that are all listed on the screen. Many of you probably know what the United Nations Sustainable Development Goals are, but we've long been inspired by the principles of regenerative tourism. And using these goals, the United Nations Development Goals, we often refer to them to solve community challenges in the destinations that we visit. For those of you who aren't aware of the goals, there are 17 goals, and they were developed in 2015 to create a better future for people and our planet by 2030. And clearly what's happening on our planet now, we're in pretty dire need of looking at all of these goals right now. So many of our trips are aligned around these United Nations development goals, and some of the key ones like access to clean water, life on land or underwater, and quality education. And of course, partnerships is another one too. Just go back to this. Hold on a second. Slide. I wanted to, just because we use our travel pillars in our the Mackenzie regenerative travel program, I wanted to just take a little bit of a dive into our Learn, Serve, and Immerse pillars. We use this as a framework in partnership with our community partners and global nonprofit organizations to connect authentically to the destination. So a little bit, of course, the learn part, you always learn when you travel. No matter where you go, you step outside of your comfort zone, you learn about the destination, the history, the culture, the natural environment, and also with the lens of some of the destination stewardship and United Nations Sustainable Development Goals. And through our partnerships, we are able to look at some of the community challenges, and we often refer to the Transformational Travel Council principles as well to learn when we travel. As far as community service goes, the serve piece, because of the nature of partnering with nonprofit partners, we are able to authentically connect to the people and the destination that we visit, and so we basically learn from them and put together experiences with our host community or the nonprofit partners that we work with. Sorry, there we go. So as far as immersing, because of the nature of working with nonprofit partners, we're able to experience the daily life with the local host, and then such as a home cooked meal or sometimes homestays, and then we are able to also have collaborative programming involved with the host community. So I may be preaching to the choir a little bit because I know Travel Oregon is a cutting edge destination manager, but I wanted to take a little bit of time to talk about what regenerative tourism is. And I personally am a student, and I always will be, of regenerative principles and constantly learning. So I just wanted to, first of all, read this quote that from Anna Pollock. Anna Pollock I call her the goddess of regenerative principles in tourism, because for over 25 years, she has basically called for the tourism industry to play a role in healing our planet in a holistic way. And I actually put together a little PDF or resources on regenerative tourism for folks that are in this panel. So I'll happily share that with you, and some of Anna's articles are in there. But really, regenerative tourism is an approach to restore harm that our system has already done to the natural world, and by adding nature's principles to create the conditions of life to thrive or flourish. And it views wholes and not parts, and it's a very different way of looking at the world. So regenerative tourism really represents a shift in our worldview, where the relationships between humans and nature are being recast, and like indigenous wisdom, indigenous brothers and sisters, we look at nature. We look at humans and nature as being in our fate as being intertwined. The next slide. I love this slide because Diane Dredge is actually based in New Zealand, and she puts together some design principles. And she looks at it shows that regenerative tourism is a constant process of learning. And so I really believe that the only viable way to regenerative action is to identify those guiding principles and how we tend to the relationships. And then I don't want to call our tourism experience an experiment, but it is really an experiment in how we are able to kind of notice the potential and patterns and adjust as we go along. So I think that's a really important part of regenerative tourism, is that we're always constantly learning and taking things back, and taking out the negative and putting in the positive, and readjusting as we go along. And so, like I referred to earlier, I pulled out this slide from a class I'm taking on regenerative principles. And really, regenerative tourism is all about thrivability. It's a holistic way of thinking in which all stakeholders build reciprocal and beneficial relationships. So regenerative tourism is really very much connected to community tourism, and the two are very much intertwined, as I just mentioned. It's a relationship between nature and humans, so it's a very important part. The community is a very important part of the concept. So we Global Family Travels, I actually prefer to use the term meaningful community-based tourism rather than voluntourism. And since I launched Global Family Travels, I've always wanted to create meaningful trips that encourage travelers of all ages to become stewards of our environment and citizens of our world. And doing that hand in hand with the host community wherever we travel to, whether it's in our own backyard or in India, is a beautiful way to learn together. So I like this quote: "A regenerative approach to tourism starts at home within ourselves, then our workplaces and our communities, and it depends on caring hosts willing to ensure their destination is healthy and full of life." And so, of course, your Travel Oregon plays an important role in that, managing all of the stakeholders and the partnerships. And so tour operators really look to destination management operators as well. So I've mentioned partnering with nonprofit partners. I think it's a really critical piece, because so many nonprofits are host, and that doesn't necessarily have to be a nonprofit. It could be a supplier or host agency that is really working hand in hand with community partners, but really doing the due diligence around the work that the nonprofit partners are doing in the host community or with the environment is a really critical part of regenerative tourism. So I just think that's a really important piece to mention. So I would, because we've applied the principles of regenerative tourism to develop the Mackenzie River, Oregon program, I wanted to explore a few examples from some of our global and actually local tours in Seattle. So I wanted to actually start with a place where Global Family Travels, when we started in 2010, had the opportunity to do a trip to Ladakh, India. And Ladakh is high in the Himalayas, and it's actually a very spiritual destination. And by nature, it's actually regenerative. So I think it's a beautiful example to use. And so it's a very remote region, and it's actually a Buddhist kingdom at the crossroads of the Silk Road. And it actually remains a place where Buddhism remains unrepressed. And there's a very sustainable lifestyle there. So I wanted to just share a little bit about our nonprofit partner there. And I go back to this place every year and see the changes in and the preservation of the community preserving the land. And so it's a beautiful example to use. I'm just going to show a few photos to kind of give you an idea of the place, because of course any regenerative principles are connected to place and preserving the place. So as you can see, it's a very pristine, beautiful place in the Himalayas, and lots of Buddhist relics everywhere, part of life. And very much the heritage is very much preserved by the people and the destination. And it's also well known as the land of the llamas. So let's see. So our nonprofit partner there is called the Siddhartha School, and actually it's a US-based nonprofit partner. And this is just to give you an example of the types of things you can do both globally and locally. So we started working with the school, and the school really preserves the education, or preserves the cultural heritage of the students while giving them a high quality education. And it actually was founded by a Buddhist monk, Kensur Rinpoche, a longtime friend of His Holiness the Dalai Lama. So there's a lot of compassionate elements woven into the school, and connection to nature as well. Part of our programming, I just pulled this slide out, is a community-based village visit, really meeting the people and going to visit some of the monasteries and learning about the history and the culture. So I wanted to use this example that we did with a small group of travelers. We're actually 8 women, and we did a village cleanup in partnership with the students. And we filled 30 garbage bags. There are lots of trekking trails into the mountains from the small village. And at the time, this is in 2010, there were basically small shops, but no waste bins to put garbage. So there was a lot of garbage in the running streams. And one of our partners, actually my college friend of mine, who's now a Buddhist nun, we recognized the need to really kind of talk about how can we help clean up this village, and do it in partnership with some people who live there, as well as some of our visitors. So we spent a day and a half filling the garbage bags, and we actually buried the garbage in the back of the schoolyard, because there's really no waste removal. At least at the time, there was not. And so we worked with some of the upper students to instill a zero trash policy that was later presented to the elders of the community, and to encourage destination stewardship and actions to foster global citizenship in both the community as well as from the traveler perspective. Learning about the importance of cleaning up the environment and where, when you travel, looking around you. And so it was really beautiful. The students, hung up the zero trash policy signs all around the village, in the shops. And I've gone back to this village almost every year, and now there are waste bins everywhere, and just pristine. And not that we were the impetus to it, but we, kind of had this concept back in 2010, and the school, presenting things to the village council really had an impact. So it was a really beautiful project, and a very regenerative project, because we're restoring the land. And here's another sign that the students made, and creating awareness of keeping our environment clean. We actually brought some used digital cameras and donated them to the school, and taught the school children how to use them as we were cleaning up the village. And so a lot of photos were taken by the students and the visitors as well, to document the program. So I'm actually switching gears to Peru right now, but just wanted to kind of use that as one of a model by which we started. And at the time we started this program in Ladakh, I didn't actually really, I wasn't aware of the term regenerative tourism, but when I reflect back on it, it truly was a regenerative program, and it's constantly being tweaked and revisited. And there are lots of stakeholders looking at keeping the environment clean. I mean, they're faced with climate change now there as well. So that's a whole nother added challenge to this community. I wanted to just kind of give another example of our program in Peru. We basically partner with several nonprofit partners there to put together a program, and it's got a very sort of international sustainable development program looking at how to support female artisans, as well as a school. There are two nonprofit partners that we have there. We actually had to put this program on the back burner when COVID broke out, but we are revisiting it and actually bringing in sustainable farming as well into this program. But there's looking at how we kind of support these two nonprofits in their work, but connecting travelers to the history of the Sacred Valley and Machu Picchu, but also using making sure that we use small, locally operated accommodations, and really connecting people to the indigenous communities, and visiting weaving the artisans and some of the indigenous tribes, and having a meal with them, and learning how they are very much connected to the land there. So learning, so that is another program that we Learn-Serve-Immerse in the Sacred Valley. I'm just sharing a few more, because I mentioned some of the United Nations Sustainable Development Goals, and kind of supporting quality education, and actually women or gender equality is another one that we in working in India really want to support the education of young women. So I mean, although regenerative principles are very much connected to the land, they're also connected to the people and how people are educated. So again, it's a web of relationships. And these are just other examples. And working with the conservation program around the African painted dog in Zimbabwe. So I go back to the importance of, with regenerative tourism, and looking at how we connect with community and how we develop community partnerships, and question whether they're working with local stakeholders and youth, and all of the people in the community. So those are really important things to keep in mind. And I wanted to share a little bit about our process, because it was a process that we used in developing the Oregon program. And as I mentioned to you, the term volunteering, I prefer the term meaningful community tourism, and looking at how we can encourage travelers to become stewards of the environment. So we have three kind of a three-step process. We have a community partner questionnaire. So when we collaborate with a nonprofit partner or host community, we have a lengthy questionnaire that we interview now by Zoom, but before we also give that questionnaire to our community partners. For example, with Cascade Volunteers, we had a half-day session where we learned about overtime. Sorry. Sorry. Is my time up? No. Okay. Sorry. I'm getting a message. Anyhow, so then we plug what we've learned about that nonprofit partner and how they are working with the community and stewarding the land or supporting community initiatives, and plug that into a viability assessment. So the viability assessment, then we take that and then we develop the travel program, ensuring that all stakeholders are happy, and then of course making it an interesting program as well. We want to make sure that that it's contributing to sustainable development, economic growth, employment, and cross-cultural understanding, and then that the program that we develop will play a key role in recovery efforts for both our local and global communities. So I want to mention, just because tourism is, I think, such an important concept for a contributor to helping in sustainable development, but also how right now with our pandemic, and how can we use tourism in a way that's going to help support our communities, and as well as steward the land. So I wanted to share a little bit about what Global Family Travels did, and this is how our program in Oregon actually got started. We had actually started some community tours in Greater Seattle using our Learn-Serve-Immerse travel pillars and supporting destination stewardship, and looking at how we can create awareness of our kind of diverse cultures and communities and some of the challenges in our communities. And so I want to share really a couple of adventures that we developed in partnership with nonprofits in the Seattle area. And we approached a Black Farmers Collective, which is a farmers that have a plot of land in downtown Seattle, and that they tell a powerful story about the intersections of urban farming, environmental justice, and food access. And it's in an increasingly gentrified area in Seattle, and so we interviewed the urban Black farmers and asked if they might be interested in developing a tourism product. And of course, they had never thought about tourism, but it is sometimes that word tourism, if you take it and use the word experience instead, because sometimes tourism, it's like you're looking and not really engaging. But we put together an engaging experience where you're truly immersed with the Black farmers in downtown Seattle. And so it's it's a half-day program, and it's a truly regenerative experience that addresses what Anna Pollock refers to as learning and practicing the alchemy of communing and gathering together in diverse groups and acknowledging differences and common ground while aligning a shared purpose and set of values. And it's a very unique program, and actually we've applied transformational travel principles that give people the opportunity to learn and grow through this half-day program at Yes Farm. And it invites guests to shift their perspectives and deepen their understanding and appreciation for community and well-being, planetary health, and our interconnectedness. So with that, I'm going to fast forward to our program. This is another program that First Nature Tours and Global Family Travels put together on the Olympic Peninsula in partnership with the Jamestown Sklallam tribe, and then and then looking at how we regenerate salmon habitat. And so I'm going to bring us to our our adventure in Mackenzie River, because this is those three pillars again of Learn, Serve, and Immerse. And we interviewed Cascade volunteers and put together. And I'm not going to talk about each one because our panelists will be talking about those as well, what you learn on this adventure. But it really gives participants the opportunity to learn and grow by working on this regenerative project and helping to rebuild the natural public spaces in the Mackenzie River. I want to just kind of end this keynote with this slide I love, because it goes back to like, there's no straight line from strategy to action in stewarding life and regenerative tourism. There's only a line from strategy to learning. And so looking at these principles and how we tend the relationships and is very important. And we're in the process of doing that. You know, we're all the panelists. We're meeting next week to even visit this program and talk about it and how we can improve it and what we've learned to date by running it a few times this past summer. And then back to this, it's all a learning journey. And so I really appreciate the time to give you this little program and background. And Kieran, I think now's a great time to invite you in to talk about, once we kind of did this process of interviewing our community partners and our collaboration and how we kind of unpacked that and put it into a travel experience that is fun for visitors.
Yeah, thanks, Jennifer. That was awesome to give that higher level overview of regenerative travel and share your experience doing this internationally, which we've all really benefited from in this process. So yeah, that brings us to the Mackenzie River Regenerative Travel Project, which is the collaborative project we put together here in Oregon with a lot of help from Travel Oregon as well through the Destination Ready grant. We were looking, as a lot of people were, I'm speaking from First Nations perspective, during the pandemic for a pivot for ways to take advantage of the fact that we didn't have the busy season that we normally would have, and think about new ways to do what we do in a more sustainable way, and kind of tie back into why we, at least me personally, got into tourism in the first place. My background is in ecology, and I spent about a decade doing restoration ecology before I got into tourism, and I've kind of like lost sight of that initial inspiration, I guess, to get into sustainable travel and to get into ecotourism over the last 17 years now. And it was, one of the benefits of being in the pandemic, I would say, is that it gave a lot of us in the industry time to kind of reflect and think a little bit more about why we're in this industry to begin with, and how we can reinvent ourselves and do things a little bit better. One of the initiatives that we took on was to start reaching out to international tour operators through our industry contacts and try and provide opportunities for them domestically to create a tour product for their clients. That was a really successful pivot for First Nature, because there's a lot of companies that just focus on outbound travel from North America, from the United States to other countries, that couldn't do anything in 2020. So this is one of those connections that came out of that initiative to kind of connect with outbound travel and refocus those travelers to their own backyard. And the Pacific Northwest is a great place to do that. A lot of people have never been here, and we've seen a huge resurgence of travel here in this last season, as most of you in the industry have experienced firsthand. The regenerative travel concept has been a really awesome one to dive into, because it's a great story. It's a great way to collaborate with a lot of different players here in the destination, with both Jennifer's company, Global Family Travel, and First Nature being tour operators with different focuses, but both coming at it from a tour operator perspective. And we work as a destination management company, kind of creating packages and selling travel experiences here throughout the Pacific Northwest. And we have our own in-house resources like guides and vehicles that we can actually operate these programs that we can help create. And so having us involved with the DMO, with Travel Oregon, and the nonprofit partner that we have here, Cascade Volunteers, as well as smaller regional DMOs like the Willamette Valley Visitors Association and Eugene Cascades and Coast, was an awesome collaborative story. So I want to dive in here to the little presentation I have, which I'm going to go through kind of quickly. As you all know from Oregon, at least, and in California, besides the pandemic, we all dealt with a lot of wildfires. So having to, have a little bit of resurgence in tourism in the end of 2020, when we thought we had the end of the pandemic was in sight, falsely thought that, and then have the wildfires come in September and basically could have put a kibosh on everything that we had booked for the rest of the year. Was extra difficult. We've been experiencing wildfires a lot more frequently over the last several years. And so this is another one of those kind of opportunities for us to kind of reevaluate tourism and see if we can do things a little bit differently and help improve the destination where we're actually taking people to. So that brings us to the Mackenzie project that we put together. And I think just before we dive into the details of how we created it, sustainable tourism versus regenerative tourism is kind of important to understand the difference there, because a lot of people understand what sustainable tourism means, and it's been used a lot for decades now. Think of it as kind of like a leave no trace principle. Regenerative tourism is different in that it actually involves a giving back and an enhancement of the destination that you're working in. So you're not just going to a place and taking only photos and leaving only footprints, as they say. You're actually going to a place and looking for ways to engage on a deeper level with a program, with a volunteer opportunity that actually helps the destination, and you can walk away knowing that you're leaving that place a better place than you found it. So the process to get to that point starts, of course, like identifying communities with a need. Wildfires were a huge impact throughout the Pacific Northwest, throughout the West Coast over the last several years. And a lot of these destinations, a lot of the small towns like you find along the Mckenzie River corridor, for instance, they really depend on this seasonal tourism to survive. And wildfires, just like the pandemic has done, have really shut that down for a lot of businesses. So figuring out where we can go and do this kind of work, and what places in the region actually need this kind of regenerative project, and then listening to those community members in the community about what their needs are, and really talking to them about how they've suffered and how a regenerative travel project could potentially help them. That's part of engaging with stakeholders, and those can be anything from lodging and outfitters to restaurant owners, to the regional DMOs themselves. There's a lot of people that feel that stakeholder title and destination, and they provide a lot of different perspectives on what actual kind of work is needed. So really listening to the community and talking to them about what their needs are is an important part of this whole process, both internationally, like Jennifer was talking about, and even domestically as well. And then you collaborate and you figure out how to create something that helps everybody. It's not always about making money, and we'll talk about this kind of a little bit later in my presentation, but the important part of this whole thing is to create a model for being able to do this kind of work and create a tourism product that actually is regenerative and can be hopefully go viral, and other people can take it and use it in their own destinations. One of the important components for making this kind of project work, because it isn't always about making money, but you do need money to make things happen, of course. It's getting grant access, and we were really lucky to be a recipient of one of the Destination Ready grants from Travel Oregon. In order to be a recipient, though, you typically need to have a nonprofit when you're looking at grant money. And so figuring out a nonprofit that's in the destination that you want to do the work in is a key component to getting it funded. And so Cascade Volunteers was the awesome partner that we worked with on this project in Oregon. And you'll talk with Al a little bit after me. One of the intentions here, it's not just to go in and, show people a destination, get a little volunteer work and leave. It's also to kind of have that long-term relationship with the destination. And that's one of the important things that we're really hoping that our story tells, is that, when you do this kind of work and you get people out into nature, engaging in a way they wouldn't maybe normally do with trail work or planting trees, you create a longer relationship, a long-term relationship with that person and that destination, so they can come back and do this kind of work with their kids, look at a tree that they planted 20 years ago and that is now thriving, hopefully. in the future. So having that sense of stewardship and that continuity into the future is really a key component here. And especially for the staycation crowd, which we were really focusing on with this project. It wasn't like we're trying to bring people in internationally, because we couldn't. It was very much like, let's bring some people from Portland, from Eugene, from Seattle, bring people from the Northwest together to do this kind of work regionally. And those kind of people local can come back and do this kind of project over and over again, and really get engaged in this kind of work is what we hope. Some of the type of work we were doing is trail maintenance. Planting trees, of course, is a big one, and it fits in conceptually with doing the wildfire recovery that we were really focusing on in the Mackenzie River corridor. Getting rid of noxious weeds, distributing goods. Bike stations, another one that's a really cool project that's going on down there, because biking is a huge part of the Mackenzie River corridor. And we got some really awesome media coverage as well, which was really fun to be a part of. We got photographer and videographer out on the site with us taking awesome footage, which you've seen this slide so far. I think there's some in the next one that Al is going to provide. We get a lot of good content, and like the story is a huge part of what we're trying to do. Like I said, it's not always about making money. It's about creating a story and telling the story that, you know, can really inspire other people here in the destination that we're in to do this kind of work, and hopefully continue to do it. Obviously, it has to not be a negative profit, but we really want to make sure the story is part of what we're trying to accomplish. One of those methods for storytelling, of course, is finding awesome brands to partner with. Al at Cascade Volunteers is really good about doing that. She'll probably talk more about it. We had Worthy Brewing out there on our first one of these regenerative trips we did in 2021, and it was really cool to have a bunch of free beer to drink while we were doing trail work. And also, you know, they brought a whole bunch more people out there besides the ones that were with our group that we could interact with. I really think that's the future of doing these kind of programs into the future as well, and getting brands to even kick money into the program themselves as a tax write-off or whatever, so they can share it with their own constituents. Also, keeping the money in the community is an important part of the process. That's something that doesn't always happen with sustainable tourism and regenerative travel. And there's a lot of ways to do that. Mostly, you know, buy your goods locally, use local outfitters and guides, stay locally on site whenever you can. That's how you're really helping those dollars stay in the community and helping to increase the impact, the positive impact that you're having on the destination. That's a little shot of our Mackenzie General Store lunches that we had on our trip. Of course, you know, you want to do some fun activities as well. So most people want to go out and they don't want to just plant trees and restore trail. They want to go have fun. And that's part of making this a really successful program. Just in brief, it's a 3-day program that we ran. We leave on Friday from Portland, pick some folks up in Eugene, end up out in Mackenzie River corridor at around 3-4 p.m. in the afternoon. Have a wonderful dinner and talk to the local stakeholders. The next morning, we do a full half day of regenerative volunteer work in the National Forest. Have lunch out there, can do some rafting that afternoon or mountain biking, depending on the season. Next morning, we get up, we do another volunteer project, can do another activity before we take off. So it's 2 kind of half days of volunteering, just a few hours each time, beautiful locations, and then a couple activities as well to kind of make it fun for everybody. Yeah, so I'll pass it on to Al now, because that's my last slide. All of our little partners there and the hashtag Build It Back Better.
All right. Thank you so much, Kieran. And awesome to have kind of that big picture overview from Jennifer, and then to have Kieran give us kind of like that outfitter guide overview for all of our outfitter guides in the audience. My name is Elisa Archer. I'm the Executive Director of Cascade Volunteers, and we are the nonprofit Friends Group partner of the Willamette National Forest. So if you are a land management agency, DMO, nonprofit, I'm going to really be talking about how those 3 groups work together to develop this Mackenzie regenerative travel project. Is everyone else hearing me okay? I'm getting some messages. Okay, great. Matt is. Awesome. So talking about how we all work together to get this Mackenzie regenerative travel project kind of off the ground. And so, yes, engaging visitors as volunteers. this Mackenzie Regenerative Travel Project, we've talked about it a lot. One of the biggest things that we were chatting about was leave it better than you found it, right? That's the main principle that we want to get across when we have folks coming in to visit. And I love that Kieran mentioned, you know, maybe it's not about the amount of work that these groups are getting done, because we kept these groups rather intimate. It was small groups that we really wanted to bond and learn about volunteering together. And so maybe, you know, they weren't getting as much work done as one of our trail crews that's been around for 20 years and it's got a bunch of trail dogs on it, right? But what these guys are doing is they're learning about some basic trail maintenance. They're learning about their impacts as visitors. And then when they go back to their communities, they're going to be ambassadors for our public lands. And even when they're coming down to the Willamette National Forest again, they're going to start to notice things when they're out recreating, and it's just going to make them more responsible recreators. So leaving it better than you found it, definitely the motto here, not we're going to finish this project and get it all the way done. It's not about the work being 100% complete, more about the experience. So that can be a bit of an adjustment. All right, so wanted to give you guys really a step-by-step, super detailed for how we develop this project, so that if you are interested in doing something similar on your national forest, grassland, what have you, you can kind of jump right in. So the first step would be nonprofit and land manager connecting. I cannot emphasize how important that level of trust is, especially when you're going into a project like this with such a large scale. We got so much publicity and had so many partners. Now for us as an organization, we are an embedded friends group, which means we work out of the supervisor's office of the National Forest. So we were really in the know in terms of what are the needs of our forest, what are the priorities, where are some funding gaps that we can help fill. In September of 2020, when the Holiday Farm Fire broke out, I was contacted, this is going to be step 2, by our local destination marketing organization, the Willamette Valley Visitors Association. And we saw what was happening in Blue River, Oregon. We saw how this fire was completely decimating this community that serves as a very important gateway to our public lands. And she called me up and we just started to brainstorm some ideas for how can we help this community, help our public lands, and have visitors start to come back, but in a way that is sustainable. So through that conversation with our DMO, this project was really born. And again, this is something that I would say even a really small nonprofit can do. When we started this, I was a staff of 1. And so if you are even an all volunteer run organization, we're going to talk a little bit about how you can make this happen for your organization, and feel free to ask questions as well along the way. So the next step was that we had our Visitors Association, our travel and tourism partners, reach out. They were the ones who reached out to Kieran. They were the ones who reached out to Jennifer. They reached out to our local lodging facilities. They made all of these connections. And then we were able to get kind of everyone in the same space and really get at the nuts and bolts of these trips dialed in. So that's when we decided that we were going to do 4 trips as part of this project, 2 in the spring, 2 in the fall, just to start out. We were going to try a variety of different trips, some that are focused on trails, some focused on tree planting, some at different difficulty levels, way out in the wilderness, just to kind of test things out and see what works, so that at the end of this experience, we could create a model and show other folks really how they could do this on their public lands. After the group got together, we divided up the work, and I'm going to show you how we did that in just a moment. We discussed the funding needs, and then as Kieran mentioned, we are a nonprofit, so we are able to apply for grant funding. And we were so incredibly grateful to receive funding from Travel Oregon's Destination Ready program that really funded this project. So again, it 100% takes a village, especially when the nonprofit that is starting this off is really a staff of 1, right? So as the nonprofit, I was the one who was really writing that grant with help from the partners and finalizing it and submitting it. I was directly coordinating projects with our forest partners, and I was the one doing all of the volunteer administration. Our destination folks were doing all of the marketing. They were doing a lot of the networking, connecting us with different, whether it's media or whether it is lodging facilities. They were connecting us with all of their partners in the community. And then just really helping to get this huge group of folks together that were passionate about this project. And then our outfitter guide, I will say, really just was absolutely amazing. Could not have done it without Kieran. Kieran organized the transportation, the lodging, the meals. He coordinated the fun activities, the rafting and the mountain biking, and then worked with Global Family Travels to handle those trip sales, make sure all of the paperwork was in order, and again, some additional marketing and outreach there because Global Family Travels just had that experience in doing these sorts of volunteerism vacations. So in the end, we were able to have folks coming from Portland down for a weekend. They were riding together. It was all inclusive. They're eating together. And it really was just a totally immersive experience, right? That Learn-Serve-Immerse, like Jennifer was talking about. And they got to experience what it's like to volunteer on the forest and to be part of the Mackenzie community in a very different way. And so it is, no secret, we were a smaller, new organization. So we had a lot of lessons learned throughout this process. I will say one of the biggest lessons learned is consider your price point. So for us, a huge part of this effort was to help build back the community. We wanted to raise funding by having folks stay at lodging facilities. We wanted our lodging partners to make money. We wanted to be eating at restaurants so that all of the restaurants in the community were making funding that way and really provide a bit of an economic boost. So you could certainly do a version of these trips at a lower price point where maybe you were camping on the national forest. And that would be a lot cheaper. Maybe you could have folks self-drive, so it's not all inclusive. Again, for us, we wanted to do that higher price point, all inclusive, and we really knew kind of who our audience was coming from Portland. Now, with that higher price point and that audience, what we ended up getting was a lot of folks who it was their first time volunteering. And so for us, it was really important to provide a lot of pre-departure information that was incredibly detailed. All of my folks here who are with trail organizations, your volunteers know not to wear shorts out on the trail, right? They know to bring bug spray. And so these are things that we realized on our second weekend. Oh yes, we need to be very, very explicit about all of these things. In terms of safety and tools, this was another area for us to be just really explicit. I think on our first weekend with the tree planting, we had folks who were using only their upper body weight to get the shovels in the ground. And so the second weekend, we did a very explicit tool overview. And it's okay if it takes 10 to 20 minutes, because guess what? Folks had questions, and then they're going to be using their energy appropriately and won't be as worn out by the end of the day. So it'll be a better experience for everyone. Just take the time to do it. Of course, over planning, scout the trails more than once. Think about the community that you're going to be in. If it is a rural community, maybe there are some rural hours for restaurants and businesses. Maybe they close early for someone's birthday. Always important to remember those aspects. And having agency presence on the field was so incredibly impactful for us. On our second weekend, it was a lot of tread work and brushing, and the agency rep that was leading that group was able to really show, hey, here are areas on the trail where the moss has been worn down because there are so many folks on the trail, they're overcrowding and widening it. This is vine maple, and this is what it does to the understory, and this is why it's so damaging, and we have to get rid of it. Being able to just kind of show from the land manager perspective really helped to connect the public to the land management agency and help them to appreciate all of the work that they do for public lands. And then the other lesson I would say learned is to really follow up with these folks. If they're coming from another place, like for us, our folks are coming from Portland down to the Mckenzie, following up and saying, hey, now you've got these great skills. Here are some organizations that you can volunteer with in Portland that do similar things. So you can pay it forward because we are an awesome nonprofit community in Oregon. And so it's just been a fantastic project. And with that, I'm going to pass it over to Matt, who is going to chat a little bit more about the agency perspective and things they did to help us push this along.
Hello, folks. Thanks, Al. Thanks, everyone. This has been really interesting to hear and learn what all went into this project. So as the land management agency, so I work for the U.S. Forest Service, the Willamette National Forest, and I'm the recreation program manager there. And so Al came to us with this proposal. And I'm here to speak about that. The Forest Service, we're not admittedly always the easiest to work with. We're limited in capacity, lots of demands, And when groups like this want to come work on the National Forest, it needs to be coordinated. We need to have some sort of formalized agreement, arrangements when this kind of work happens. We can't just have folks showing up and planting trees wherever they want or doing trail work without some coordination. And so it's really important on anything like this that there's that local connection with the local unit, the National Forest, or whatever the public land management agency might be. And as we work through this, it takes time. And so I think one of the things is reaching out early. And so we were able to, in this case, work through a bunch of questions that came up because there are things that can trigger different rules and requirements that we have as a federal agency to make sure people are safe out there, that no one's going to get hurt, and that the work that's done is done in a way that's a benefit to the National Forest System, as well as a benefit to the recreating public. And so I'm here to speak about what happened here in this case, and every situation is different. Every national forest is different. Different land management agencies are different. So I'll share the process that we went through, some of the thought process, where we ended up with this process. And so when Al came and Cascade Volunteers brought this idea to us, there was a few things that came up that raised potential issues, that the fact that there's paying clients involved, because that sometimes can trigger some extra or additional authorities or steps you have to jump through, as well as we hadn't worked with Kieran before in his company. And so we have rules around outfitting and guiding on the National Forest that require permits. And so, but working with Al and really having that trusted partnership with Cascade Volunteers helped us get to a place where we could say yes to this, and get to a place where we could say yes to it pretty easily. And so some of those things that helped make this one an easy yes was that folks stayed off forest, that they stayed in a local lodge. And so when people were paying, they're paying off the National Forest, and that makes it easy for us. And another part too was that the trip used existing outfitter guides. So Kieran came in, but the visitors came in and used some of our local already permitted outfitter guides for the rafting trips, for the biking trips. And so those two steps made this really easy to say yes, because we had Cascade Volunteers as our trusted partner with very experienced working and leading volunteer groups, and being able to handle the paperwork side of those volunteer agreements. And so that, Elisa talked about that earlier, about how they're embedded with us. We have a long relationship with them. And that was a critical part of this as well. It made it really easy for us to say yes. We also wanted to, seeing the impacts of the fires firsthand, we wanted to be in a place where we could say yes to this, so that we could, encourage tourism in these communities. We manage the national forests for everyone. And we still want to pay attention to our local communities that are embedded or that are within our national forests, and making sure that they're supported as well. And so seeing an opportunity like this to bring people in, support our local restaurants and local lodges, that's exactly the kind of thing where we want to try to say yes to as well. Another consideration that was important is that there was stewardship, and that stewardship was real. And while it may not be as productive of stewardship as some of our long experienced volunteers, it was still real. They're still planting trees that will grow out there. They're still out there taking care of trails that recreationists are going to use. That was important because we want to make sure that that good work is happening out there. And so to see that they were going to be out there doing some good work, getting things done, is really important. And that stewardship ethic. The Forest Service talks all the time internally, how do we instill a stewardship ethic in our visitors? And what a great way to do it than to have new folks come in, plant some trees, do some trails for the first time. That can be a life-changing experience. I know for my one of the reasons why I'm here with the Forest Service is one of the first times I went out and volunteered and did trail work, I never looked at a trail the same way again. And so really, this is such a great opportunity for us to be able to support some of this effort around building that stewardship ethic. And so that when folks come to the National Forest in the future, they'll see examples of work that they did that maybe others did for them in that specific location. And so those were some of the really important considerations, that we had a trusted local partner, that they were working with local outfitter guides that were already well established in the community, supporting the local businesses, that the stewardship was real, with real benefits to the national forest lands, and that it was really going to instill that stewardship ethic in our visitors. And so those were some of those really important considerations for us to be able to make time to say yes to this fantastic opportunity. We did have one lesson learned for us on the agency side. Al referenced this a little bit, but we need to make sure that we have good projects for folks, knowing that this is likely to attract volunteers that may not have as much experience. We need to make sure that the projects are lined up and prepped, and that our folks are ready to work with those folks. And so that was an important lesson learned from us that we'll continue to use going forward. And so that's what I have to share about our experience working through this. It was awesome to see it out there. We're really excited to continue working and trying to support this kind of opportunity for folks to experience their natural forest lands in a different way, in a way that will hopefully provide benefits to them, to the communities, and to the landscape out there. And so that's all I have. And so at this point, I'm going to turn it over to Scott to lead us to the next part of this discussion.
All right. Thank you, everyone. Jennifer, Kieran, Elisa, and Matt, really appreciate your time, your insights. I'm learning a ton. I have some questions. I think we've had a couple that have come in from the audience. So please, audience, continue to ask questions. I do want to open it up just before I even ask any questions. I know that relationships are a really big part of this. You guys have obviously built relationships. You've probably built learnings. And just as you hear each other speak, are there things that you want to reflect on, or anything that you want to just share back, just to wrap up, just to bring it full circle? Because I really appreciate the way that you guys have made this presentation and shared that information. But I'm just going to open the floor to see if there's any comments, just to kind of, any additional context you want to share about this program.
Yeah, I would love to say something about Al's It Takes a Village slide. I absolutely love those circles and the meeting place that we've all kind of joined in the middle. I know you can't bring it back, but I just think that is such a reflection of regenerative relationships, or the kind of the it's an example of what goes into building a regenerative experience, that web of relationships and how they overlap. So I was like, oh, wow, look at that. And it just, love that slide. And then Matt, thank you so much. Like, I like hearing, I don't want to say the back end, but what the destination, stewarding the lands and the importance of destination stewardship is just kind of bringing it back to our own ethos of making sure that that's part of the building, the experience. So this is quite amazing to me to see it all come together. So thank you.
Yeah, I'd say just a big shout out to Travel Oregon too, because none of this would have been able to happen at all without the grant that we got. So I really appreciate that opportunity to be able to subsidize the cost for our participants, especially because this is, a pilot year for us doing these regenerative projects, and we're hoping to do these into the future. And, there's a few things that we're still figuring out and how to get them really dialed in, but having that, the DMO support was really key to being able to get this program successfully off the ground in a really short turnaround time, like talking like a couple months, which is pretty crazy for developing a whole tour product that's never been developed before, especially in the uncertain times we're in with COVID right now. I mean, if anybody else in the industry, just anybody else experiencing the world right now knows, like, there's a lot of uncertainty at any given turn. Something could be closed, or you can't find a vehicle to rent, or whatever it is. Like, infrastructure is just not quite back yet. So it's been really awesome to have the whole partnership tackling those problems, and a whole team of awesome professionals working together on it.
Yeah, and I'll just echo what folks are saying, kind of this team environment. I think especially there can be kind of some disconnect a lot of times between nonprofits and outfitter guides, which is so funny to me because, outfitter guides are going out all the time with groups and really see things that need to be worked on. And so being able to foster those relationships, closer relationships with our local outfitter guides, as well as with First Nature from Portland, has been absolutely amazing to kind of close that loop.
Yeah, there's a good question from Darlene about figuring out price point. And so like I mentioned, this was subsidized by the grant. So the price point that people ended up paying was considerably lower than that operating costs. And you can't actually have people pay to volunteer on national forest land. So that's another workaround. Al could probably talk more about that. But the important thing is, we had to cover our costs to make this all inclusive, which is, vehicle, guide, transportation, lodging, every single meal, all the equipment we needed to get everything done on the trails, and then also the activity itself. So whether it was whitewater rafting or mountain biking or both, it's a lot of costs to have an all-inclusive 3-day program. So we brought it down.
And don't forget the operational side, the back end too.
And there's many hours that we've spent putting this all together and running it and marketing it, and the website, like Jennifer said, for the booking engine, all those costs. So that, Al, you can kind of talk about the workaround maybe real quick about how to not have people pay to volunteer.
Yeah, for sure. So Darlene, kind of the way that we broke it down was all of those back end administrative costs are what we applied for in terms of the grant. So Kieran's outfitter guide fees, transportation costs, the fees for hosting, the website for the ticket sales, any materials and supplies we needed in terms of PPE, personal protective equipment and tools. All of that was covered by the grant. And that way, what we had folks who are coming on the trips, they're paying for their lodging, they're paying for their food while they're in the Mackenzie River corridor, and they're paying for the fun activities such as, the mountain biking and the rafting. So that way, everyone who was coming on the trips was making a direct contribution to the local economy. And we were all being supported on the back end by the grant. And that was how we figured out our price point for these trips.
Yep.
Yeah. Exactly. And maybe I'll just chime in from Travel Oregon's standpoint, because we're funded by transient lodging taxes. So basically, when people stay in hotels, campgrounds, Airbnbs, they pay a state tax. There's also oftentimes county and city taxes. And so that's how we get funded. And I shared our mission before, our vision, and we really care about not just trying to get people to travel, but also stewarding the experiences and working with the locals. And I think that it's part of our mission, and hopefully a growing part of our mission, to support these kinds of projects. So, and we can put this up on the chat, or maybe Hillary can, but if you basically, I would suggest that you get on Travel Oregon's industry newsletter, where we will announce future opportunities, but we are going to be looking to work with other destination partnerships like this to try and pilot additional efforts. And I think there is a question about self-sustainability, and we can dive into that a little bit more potentially of the model. But we also think that if we're giving back and we're also educating visitors and supporting locals and kind of adding a bunch of good, that it's worth it to try and pilot these and figure out the model, and then figure out how we can support it. So I do anticipate that Travel Oregon will hopefully continue to support this kind of work in the future. So definitely stay tuned for that. But I'll let the conversation continue to see if there's any additional riffs that people want to chime in on.
There's a question earlier about what type of entities are wanting to welcome service groups. And Jennifer kind of touched a little bit on other programs that we were collaborating on to create in the Pacific Northwest. One of them on the Olympic Peninsula, that we were working with a local tribe out there to do salmon habitat restoration and actually have like some significant cultural interpretive exchange and immersion. That was an awesome program that really fits in the Learn, Serve, and Immerse pillars really beautifully, because there's the cultural component is there, there's like that education that's very clear, and then also the salmon habitat restoration, which actually ties both ecologically into the destination as well as culturally into the native population that we were going to be interacting with. That the tribe was very receptive at first, and then it became kind of clear that it was just kind of not the right timing, with the pandemic still kind of looming over us. And then, they had a tragedy, a major tribal member passed away unexpectedly. And that one just didn't actually get off the ground this year, but it was very well received in the beginning. And we're definitely going to keep working on that program into the future to hope that we can get something like that happening up on the Olympic Peninsula. The Gorge is another place that we were working on, finding a nonprofit partner to work with. And that's another kind of a roadblock a lot of times is finding someone like Al and Cascade Volunteers that can actually have the bandwidth to take on this kind of program, because it's, they usually have their hands full. It's, like Al can tell you, it's a small staff of a lot of times just her, and there's not a lot else they can take on. And so it may sound like a great idea to come out to a destination and say, hey, we're going to do all this work for you and make the destination better, help us get this grant and help us put together this program and help us, there's a lot of work on the nonprofit that they don't necessarily have the capacity for. So that's another issue that we ran into multiple times, trying to put more of these regenerative travel projects together, is just finding the partner that had the bandwidth to be able to handle bringing people to them.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I wanted to mention, just to take that thought further, is kind of part of that community questionnaire, and with the nonprofit partner, is really exploring whether a tourism or adventure, developing an adventure, makes sense in the first place. And, is there too much of a burden on the nonprofit to manage it, or even the host community? I mean, in some cases, they might not want it, but maybe have like a couple of hours to introduce something, especially on a bigger trip, versus 3 days of volunteering or community service.
Yeah, I had questions that dived in a little deeper into both of these topics. One, I'll start on the market side. A lot of the images that were shown, especially in Jennifer, your presentation, were international trips. And I'm wondering domestically, whether it's international visitors or domestic visitors, if you're seeing an uptick in demand for these kinds of products where people spend part of their vacations volunteering and giving back on a domestic level. And if you can share your thoughts about that demand.
Yeah, that's a great question, Scott. I mean, I do believe with the global pandemic that people, kind of went within for a little while and were like, okay, how can I help support my community? A lot of social injustices occurred, environmental, that are connected to land injustices as well. So, it's all connected, and we have seen a lot of interest. We actually launched a graffiti tour in Seattle with 3 nonprofit partners, in urban adventure, and those are supporting youth and underserved youth in the arts, and really looking at, so yes, we are seeing a demand more so, I think, and I think we're going to see more of that when people are comfortable traveling globally rather than just going on a vacation. Of course, everyone's dying to go on vacation globally or somewhere, but really looking at doing it in a meaningful way instead of, and doing it intentionally with purpose.
Yeah, that's a great point, for sure. And I think it'll be easier, as hopefully we move past the limitations of the pandemic that we're experiencing, to be able to work with more partners that have more capacity. Everybody's got staffing issues right now. Resources are slim. A lot of hotels can't even stay open because of staff limitations. So I think this kind of project will gain more traction moving forward. And I think it's still new enough, but the concept of regenerative travel is still new enough to a lot of people that, we're not at least seeing like people asking for it. It's something that I think if we put it out there, people are going to be really excited about. We've seen a really good response. We were interviewed, Al, by like 10 different news channels. Just within a couple of months of us launching this. And, that alone, like, just shows you how hungry not just the media, but just the general population are for a feel-good story for this kind of a moment that isn't just about the world burning and, about pandemics. It's like, this is about coming back and collaborating to do so. And that's kind of the storytelling I was talking about earlier, where, that's one of the major opportunities we have here, is to tell the story of how to collaborate to make something really positive happen that comes out of tragedy. That, it isn't about making money. It isn't about like our own personal interests anymore. It's about all of us looking at the destination's needs and saying, hey, what can we do together to make it better? And, people want to engage with that kind of a story, and they want to be a part of that kind of a feeling. And a rising tide floats all boats, like they say. So, it'll trickle down and like spread to other parts of the destination the more this kind of work we can get out there.
Great. Hopefully the tree work that's happening in my background isn't too loud. I do want to flip the question. You mentioned it's not about making money, but I do think it needs to fit within the organization's missions and capacities. And maybe to Elisa and Matt, your perspective on, be honest with us. We're here, we're colleagues, we want to help this work. What, from a land manager or from a nonprofit side, what is required? Maybe it's not as much work than it normally would be in a half day or a day, but like, what does it really need for you guys to make it pencil out? Is it money? Is it, what is it? What is that? Can you give us some thoughts?
Go ahead.
Okay, I'll jump in, Matt. I'm a nonprofit professional, so I always have to say that capacity support is incredibly important. Going forward, I know kind of one of the questions was about like sustainability of this type of a project, right? So there are workarounds, even if you're a staff of one. For each of our 4 travel weekends, we partnered with an additional nonprofit partner to help to coordinate the trips and work with us to really make that happen. So even though there are maybe some capacity issues that are insurmountable, or that seem insurmountable, they really can be accomplished by bringing some more folks into the fold. But having that paid staff position, at least a few of them on the nonprofit side, to help to coordinate this effort and really keep this communication open is so crucial. And it's just been a really challenging time for all of our nonprofits nationwide. So that capacity support on the back end, it's just so important.
Yeah, and that's a big issue for us too. Our capacity limits are real. We've speaking for the recreation side, seen tremendous increases in use in general, and so our recreation folks are already beyond capacity in terms of being able to do work. With all the competing demands, and more is being asked of our recreation folks in the national forest, and so. I think while those limits are real, I think work like this can be important. But the kinds of things that can really help make it easier is early engagement. Because some early decisions can make something a lot easier to get done than otherwise. If we had to issue a special use permit for this, I don't know if we would have been able to make it work. Hopefully we would have, but that's a lot more hoops to jump through, a lot more thinking, a lot more internal conversations than it is just to be like, okay, Al, you make sure everyone's under a volunteer agreement. Everything else is off the national forest. And not that it has to be that way in the future. We can do special use permits for this kind of thing, but that early engagement as the thoughts are going into designing or putting together something like this, some input from the land manager, from the Forest Service, I'll speak from my own perspective, can help make some of those early choices, make it an easier lift. And so that capacity limit doesn't get in the way as much. And so I think that's the big thing that I would encourage or recommend from this, recognizing that we can't say yes to everything because we get asked to do a million different things. And while we try to do a ton of things, we can't do it all. And so, I think, again, having a partner like, in this case, like Cascade Volunteers that could handle a lot of the paperwork and was well experienced and could get a lot of it done, where we almost, just show up to help on the day. That's the kind of thing that can make it easier for us, at least speaking for my forest, for the Willamette National Forest.
One of my thoughts, sorry if you don't, can I jump in for, is this what Al mentioned about paying it forward, also like the storytelling piece, and really, like taking what you learned as a visitor as part of the experience and going back and sharing it with others. Other people may not have had the privilege to, actually my lawn guy's outside too, sorry, to go and experience it. So, like social media posts are really kind of the need for regenerating the lands and communities, and what you've learned to pay it forward, I think is a really important part of that experience. And I think something we all need to focus on as we go forward with it as well.
Yeah, one of the things I really liked that was brought up was that there was a diversity of price points for these types of trips. So they can be higher end trips. And I think about international, where you're already planning to spend a lot of money probably, and then you build in a volunteer, or it could be literally bringing people from a metro area out to, let's say, Eastern Oregon, to on a vacation, they get to do some backpacking, but they get to do a bunch of volunteer work. So I like that there's different price points and components to that piece. And I just wanted to, share that from a perspective to the audience to think that way. And I have heard from, particularly groups that are outside of metro areas saying that they could use more bodies in the forest. And I'd love to see, and maybe Matt, you have a thought about this, but to continue to see the collaboration between guides and outfitters and nonprofit, stewardship groups as really a value add. I know that, I think that there's a lot of benefits of having guides and outfitters out there on the land, but maybe there's a way that we could even share as we're in the outdoor recreation. There's obviously other ways you can give back as we're in an outdoor recreation summit, a little bit more just details on just that, like the mechanics of how we can build that connection and relationship between the nonprofit partners, the tour operator as guides, and the land manager. Any insights from the panel on that?
Yeah, I mean, I can jump in first. I think, that nonprofit liaison partner, connection, I think is really critical. We have more abilities to work with nonprofits than we do have with commercial entities, in terms of formalizing and organizing this kind of relationship. And so having that nonprofit liaison connection with an outfitter guide can help make it easier. Just like a nonprofit can go for grants, it also opens up opportunities. Again, I can only speak for the Forest Service. I can't speak for all land management agencies, but at least it opens up more opportunities for the Forest Service in terms of what kind of agreement that might be or arrangement it might be to make something like this happen. And so that said, we also see outfitters guides as ambassadors as well, as they can bring that stewardship ethic, and education around what's out there and what it takes to manage these lands as well. And so I think that can be a really important component of it, especially when you have when you can engage those local outfitters guides who can really speak to the local environment, the local conditions, what's been going on out there, and supporting those local communities, because that's important to us as well. So I'll stop there and let anyone else add on to it.
Yeah, I wish everybody had a Cascade Volunteers. Like that's the problem, really, because not every Forest Service has a component like you do. And so that access is really difficult, as you know, as we've talked about, for outfitters and guides to do anything on National Forest Service land, because the capacity is so limited administratively as well as just policy wise. So, I hope you can. I hope more forests can actually adopt that model with an internal nonprofit that would grant that kind of access, because it's a brilliant strategy.
Yeah, maybe this drives the demand, or I know it's hard to start a nonprofit, but maybe that there is a need for that connection of like a nonprofits that specialize in stewarding land and working more closely together with forest management.
Yeah, we're incredibly lucky to have Cascade Volunteers, but it's not a requirement. I think there are examples out there where nonprofits have come into a rural area and worked with the National Forest, even if they're out of Portland, and so I think while it definitely helps, we are lucky on the Willamette. There's only a few national forests that have embedded fringe group like this, but it's not insurmountable to approach it in other ways. And so I think that's where building those relationships coming in, and I think in those cases, especially being able to demonstrate a commitment to getting good work done on the landscape, whether that's trails related or otherwise, and that it's not just necessarily a one-off, that there is going to be a commitment to an area, to a place, that any initial investment might pay dividends beyond just that one trip or that 1 year. And if it's going to be a repeated thing, those are the kinds of things that might make it easier to get an inroad with a local agency individual. Al.
And something we kind of we've kind of touched on, but haven't explicitly mentioned. We do have a district on our forest that actually recommends that outfitter guides do volunteer work each year when they're going through the process of kind of reapplying for their permit. So through that, we had different outfitter guides that are local that were already connected with our nonprofit because they were volunteering and contributing hours at the forest's request. So that was a really easy way that our forest could kind of start to connect the nonprofit and the outfitter guide. And we could all start talking and learning about our common uses in the forest and working together more.
All right, thank you. We're on the very last couple minutes here. So first of all, there were a couple questions I want to try and address. There are folks who are asking if someone could share information about signups or working with a group to do this purpose. I do think it takes your own local coordination to do the work, but please do check in with me. Feel free to check in with me. And my email is sbricker@traveloregon.com. But Travel Oregon is hopeful to support more of these types of projects. Also, there was a specific question about, will a step-by-step guide be available? I think, Jennifer, that's a question for you. But I'm going to ask everyone to give like a 2-sentence. It has to be really quick because we have 2 minutes left. Any final word? And Jennifer, you can share a yes or no on that question. I'll let you go first. For me, I took home, leave it a better place than you found it. Jennifer, maybe you can answer the question of whether you're able to share those resources, whether they're proprietary, and then a 1-sentence wrap up.
I think the question came, Al had a step-by-step process. I think that was from her. Our community procedures and all of that, we work with our partners on that and share them, but I'm happy to, my email is info@globalfamilytravels.com. You can find me, and I'm happy to collaborate with anyone who's interested in learning the procedures that we shared with First Nature and Cascade volunteers. And then Al, I'll let you answer the other one after I just, like I said, I think I already shared my 2 sentences. Was just kind of blown away by it takes a village and the regenerative and healing of our land and communities. This just the web of relationships is what my big takeaway is.
Yes. And so yes to that question. As part of our grant with Travel Oregon, we are going to be developing a model that other folks can use to have similar programs at different price points across the state, Pacific Northwest, you name it. So keep an eye out. And you are also welcome to email me, elisa.archer@cascadevols.org.
All right, you guys, you have 5 seconds each.
Yeah, I'd say collaborate. That's it. I mean, talk to each other and find opportunities that way, because you never know what's out there.
Yep, and read out early and often.
Awesome. Well, thank you, panel. Really appreciate it. I hope everyone could go to additional sessions. Check the website for the next sessions that are coming up. Thank you all, and Trails Coalition, Travel Oregon, who are helping produce this. We'll see you soon.
Thank you.
Okay, bye.